Pick number 11 in the NFL draft just might be the sweet spot, or is it a total trap? At number 11, you aren't just drafting a player, you're either finding a Hall of Fame cornerstone or a franchise-altering headache. Think about it. This is a slot that gave us J.J. Watt, the most dominant defender of a generation, and Big Ben, a two-time Super Bowl champ, who was the third quarterback taken in his own class. But it's not the same spot where the Saints also use a first-round pick on a punter. From the legendary pass rushers to special teams, what ifs, and the history of the 11th pick is wilder than you may think. Today we're ranking the biggest steals, the massive busts, and the icons of the number 11 spot. Let's dive in because we're 32 straight days of getting ready for the NFL draft and looking at the 32 top spots with our friend Ed Cleese joining us here on Pigskin Dispatch. If you're tuning in today, we release this. We are 11 days from the NFL draft in Pittsburgh for 2026, and we are counting down the top 32 spots. If you have missed any of them, go back here on pigskindispatch.com or on the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel and check them out. Ed Cleese has been my guest here through this journey, and he's with us again today for slot number 11. Ed, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darin, how are you today?
I'm doing super, Ed. I said, we are really rolling along here, about a week and a half out of the draft. We'll be knowing what the futures of our teams are going to be as they select the top college players in the nation. And we got a lot of great legends to talk about tonight. This is really a big booming pick here at number 11. Some really big stars. So what's your overall
Yeah, I think, we talked about it the last 2 days. Have we reached the point in this countdown where things have changed? And I'd say, yes, clearly they have. We're at the point now where, in this case, I'm going to have a guy that's not in my top 5 that is in the Hall of Fame, and he's not in my top 5. So that just right off the bat tells you how strong this has been. And it's we talked about 13 being really good and 12 being pretty good. 11's better than both, I would say, just kind of like in terms of volume. And just overall oomph for sure.
Yeah, by far, I think we have more than double of any other pick we've talked about so far. They're in the Hall of Fame so far, and we probably have a handful of others that probably will find their way to Canton in the next 10 years.
Right. Yeah. So talking about that, lately it hasn't been, lately we talked about the 12th pick looking really kind of strong. The 11th pick, not as much in recent history in the last 12 years or so. Minkah Fitzpatrick is having a very nice career for sure. He was the 11th pick, and Chris Olave is very good and very talented, but he's got to stay healthy. He's had those concussion issues that are kind of holding him back a little bit, but he's a really good player. And then I would say the negative about this pick would be this was some major hits and some major misses. The quarterbacks were kind of in between. We had Justin Fields, who I would say is not trending great at this point. Jay Cutler, who had a little bit of a polarizing career, I'd say. But
Justin Fields may be the starter for the Chiefs, so
we'll see. I'll bet you any money he's ready. Mahomes is ready by week 1. We'll see. But Jay Cutler was taken here, and Dante Culpepper. So guys that were good and certainly were not busts, but also weren't elite or anything like that. There were a lot of busts, though, and I would say that especially in the 80s, from 1980 through 1991, we had one Hall of Famer, we had one excellent player, and then the other 10 combined players, Darin, they combined for one Pro Bowl appearance. So it was a long stretch of guys that were taken number 11 overall that didn't amount to a lot, and there were some real notable ones. In 1982, the Chiefs took a gentleman named Anthony Hancock, who was a receiver and did nothing. And then this is hard to do. In 1987, the Saints took a gentleman at defensive tackle named Sean Knight. He was in 3 teams for 3 seasons. He had 1 start and 1 stat. He recovered a fumble. And I don't know how that works, but he didn't have a tackle. He didn't have an assist. He has nothing else but 1 fumble recovery. In his entire career. So he did scratch. Somehow he fell on the ball. So congratulations to Mr. Knight. One on Wikipedia on Sean Knight, it actually calls him one of the biggest busts in draft history. I mean, I think based on the fact that he saw the field so little. And in 1985, we had a very unfortunately named cornerback, Richard Johnson. So Dick Johnson was taken in 1985. He had 8 interceptions in 1 year and then did nothing else. So I guess the rest of his career was kind of, you could say, flaccid.
Yeah, you're just making me think. After your bad jokes, I got to throw one in there too. I wonder if when they had Anthony Hancock sign his contract, hey, let's put your Anthony Hancock on the line here, please.
Right. We should just stop right there.
Yeah, we probably should.
Yeah.
Too many dad jokes.
I've had that one. I've had that one in the chamber for a couple of days, and I couldn't wait to let it go. And then Ron Dane was also taken in 2000, a Heisman Trophy winner. Who didn't amount to a whole lot. So
he's one of a couple Heisman Trophy winners we have selected at this spot.
Right. And he didn't turn into much. And then I'm just going to name one honorable mention that wasn't really top 5 worthy, and that would be Wilbur Marshall. One of my personal favorites. I loved Wilbur. He played on the late 80s, early 90s Redskins, was on the 91 Redskins, the great 91 Redskins. He had a lot of swag. He was so fun. So he was on the 85 Bears and he was on the 91 Redskins. So that's really awesome. And he was a heck of a player. He was really good. He had 2 first-team All-Pros. In 92, probably had one of the best seasons in the Redskins history as a defensive player, was dominant. His career wasn't super long, and maybe his peak wasn't like, he wasn't like a superstar, but he was a heck of a player, really good player.
Yeah, definitely. When you're playing on the great defenses that you just talked about, 85 Bears and the Skins in the early 90s, and he was one of the stars of it too. So
sure, yeah, he was like I said, he was just a easy guy to root for, and I thought he was so cool when I was a kid, no doubt. Number 58, yeah, I thought he was so he looked like a linebacker. He played like a linebacker.
Did he sing in the Super Bowl Shuffle song?
He didn't have a solo. I know that because I know all the guys that had a solo. I'm sure he was maybe dancing around in the background there, maybe.
I figured you were just been listening to it earlier.
Just over and over again,
yeah. I don't think I've heard it for about 40 years, but
my one cut, Darin, from the top 5 is painful because, like I said, this guy's in the Hall of Fame, and that's Dwight Freeney. He did not make my top 5.
Wow.
Had to cut somebody.
I'm assuming that you did take some people that are not in the Hall of Fame at this moment.
I think 2 at this moment, but I think are both surefire.
Yeah, I think okay. I just wanted to say that you left the Hall of Famer out, and there's 2 guys not in there. Okay, this will be a good one. This is gonna be a fun ride.
Yep.
Let's take a break for a moment to tell you about a new product so that you can take and put your football knowledge that we feed you each and every day to the test. It is the Pigskin Trivia Drive on pigskindispatch.com. You're the quarterback. You call the shots, choose your play, grind it out with a run, pick up steady gains on a short pass, or risk it all with a long pass for a massive chunk of yardage. It isn't just a quiz, it's a march for glory. It's the Pigskin Trivia Drive. Remember, when the huddle's over, when you pick your play, the faster you answer, the more yards you gain. Hesitation is the enemy of the end zone. Keep those chains moving. Cross that yellow line to reset your downs and earn a critical audible. Stuck on a tough defensive look? Use those audibles to strip away 2 wrong answers and find your open receiver. Watch the play clock. You've got just 25 seconds to make the read. Take too long, and it's a 5-yard penalty for delay of game. It's game action. In this stadium, your brain is the engine, but the clock is the opponent. The mission is simple. Score as many touchdowns as possible in 5 minutes, and when the clock hits 0, your score hits the global leaderboard. Are you a bench warmer or a Hall of Famer? Step up to the line. Your drive starts now on pigskindispatch.com, the Trivia Drive. Don't let your football history knowledge go to waste. Try the Pigskin Trivia Drive on pigskindispatch.com. And now, let's get back into our program.
You ready? Okay. So number 5 this is number 5, the guy that beat him out. And I like this because they play the exact same position and they played in not the exact same, but a similar era. And this actually wasn't that hard of a decision. And I've got DeMarcus Ware, drafted in 2005, defensive end by the Cowboys. And the reason this, I'm not necessarily like the stats are end all be all. I'm an eye test guy. I'm a feel guy. I'm like, especially in football where there's not as much sample, who really affected the game the most. But if you have 2 guys that are very similar, then let's let the stats break the tie. And in this case, Freeney played 40 more games than Ware, but Ware had 13 more sacks and 300 more tackles than Freeney.
Okay.
Yes. And
I was going to guess. I would have guessed maybe Freeney had more sacks.
No, and Ware had 7 All-Pros to 4. And I would just kind of say the eye test as well. Freeney was more, to me, of a specialist. He was a pass rushing specialist, whereas Ware was more of just an all-around great defensive end. And it kind of backs it up with all the extra tackles that we saw. So 2 great players. Obviously, you're going to be thrilled with either one if you take them with the 11th pick in the draft. But I do think Ware was better than Freeney, and I think there's some good reasoning behind it.
Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, it'd be interesting to say in this era that we're in now of the edge rusher being so highly regarded, maybe would either one of these guys last to number 11 in today's market?
Right. So going on to number 4, Darin, I know as a historian, you're going to appreciate maybe this reference, but this player reminds me of the defensive version of Gale Sayers. And when I say that, I mean a short career, but almost unparalleled in that career. Gale Sayers made the Hall of Fame by 6-7 years, was it? Not very many before he was couldn't overcome his injuries. And I've got Patrick Willis at number 4.
Oh, yeah.
Drafted in 2007, linebacker for the 49ers. So from 2007 through 2013, I'd say he was Ray Lewis-esque, very, very similar kind of player. He was an All-Pro every single year except this last year, which he did make the Pro Bowl in that year. He only played he was technically in the league for 8 years. In 2013, if you remember, in the NFC Championship game in Seattle, he suffered a devastating, gruesome knee injury. And he tried to come back the next year and really couldn't, and then that was it. It was over. So he really only played 7 seasons in the NFL, but those 7 seasons were exceptional, A+, dominant, arguably best defensive player in the league for like 7 years. So for me, he is in the Hall of Fame. And I think he deserves to be much like Sayers.
Yeah, or Sayers or Terrell Davis, right? That same thing where you have that such an impact in your short amount of time that you did shine. Your star was pretty bright. So yeah, I think great selection. Love Patrick Willis.
Yep. So moving on to number 3 is a guy that I don't love to talk about, but I have a pretty strong proponent of, and I would guess that there will be people that wouldn't have this player quite as high. But I've got Michael Irvin at number 3, drafted in 1988 by the Cowboys. I think some of the Cowboys, we talked about this with Emmitt Smith a little bit when we talked about him. I think some of the Cowboys from that era suffer from their own dominance, meaning the Cowboys offense in those early to mid 90s was so good that they only had to do so much, and they didn't need any one guy to carry the load all the time. So they won a lot of blowout games. They ran the ball a lot. They were very balanced, run and pass. So his stats stacked up against other Hall of Fame receivers don't really stand out. But from 91 through 95, he had over 1,240 yards receiving every year. So big, what we call him playmaker, right? That was his nickname. So a big-time player, stretched the field, was also a major third down threat, big time. He was a gamer. Just a big game player. He gave the Cowboys that extra like juice on offense. They were pounding people with that offensive line and Emmitt, and then they just crushed you when they needed to through the air. I bet you if he would have played in an offense like with Marino during that era or something like that, he probably would have put up bigger numbers. Hall of Fame receiver. I'll take him against a lot of guys.
Yeah, he made a lot of big plays when they need to make plays, but I think that's a good point that you say when you have Emmitt Smith, knocking off 5 yards per carry, and you have a gigantic offensive line that just beating the defensive line into submission every game. Do you really need to put the ball up in the air because there's only a couple things that can happen, and most of them are bad when you throw a pass. Running the ball with the league's leading rusher for his career, That's not a bad option to have. So I think that definitely hurt his stats a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think some people look at that, and also we have to adjust for eras as well. It was just a little bit of a different game. We are tied. It's hard to believe. It makes me feel old. It's hard. We're taught he was drafted like almost 40 years ago. So I mean, it's a different league. So and he did get off to a slow start in his career. He didn't take off until they took off, really. But he was a big reason they did take off. So now we got top two, and this wasn't. I went back and forth a little bit on these top two, and I didn't want to do it, but I'm going to do it. I've got J.J. Watt at number 2, drafted in 2011, defensive end by the Texans.
I'm kind of surprised you have him there.
Yeah, okay. Well, I've got some reasoning for it. Defensive end by the Texans. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. There's no question. He's not eligible yet. He had an okay rookie year. And then he had perhaps, is it the best 4-year run that any defensive player in the history of the NFL has ever had? Maybe. I mean, he was the defensive player.
Save LT, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, he was defensive player of the year 3 out of 4 years. And that ties. Do you know who that ties for the most all time?
I'd say Lawrence Taylor, maybe.
No, it's Bruce Smith. So Bruce Smith and J.J. Watt both have 3 defensive player of the years. Smiths were kind of spread out. Watts was 3 times in 4 years. We said that he was the best defensive player in the NFL. That's nuts. 69 sacks over that span. That span. He had an injury-riddled 2 seasons after that. And then he came back in 2018. He was the comeback player of the year. He had 16 sacks and was first-team All-Pro again. Then he had more injuries. And then he was solid with the Cardinals in his last year, 2022, where he had 12.5 sacks. So somewhat similar to Patrick Willis, not quite as dramatic of a ending, but in terms of like just being insanely good and then having it kind of unravel a little bit. But I think he was good for long enough for us all to see that this guy's going to Canton and he's one of the more dominant players we've ever seen on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I could always remember that 4-year run, like you're saying. It seemed like every time you would see a highlight or hear anything about the Houston Texans, there's J.J. Watt knocking a pass down or knocking a quarterback down. It seemed, he would terrorize the signal callers on the opposition. And I wish he would have I think it would have been kind of cool for selfish reasons, but for cool reasons too, that he would have played in 2023 with his brothers on the Steelers. Because I think he may have been able to work something out on there. He could have been with Derek and TJ and, had 3 brothers, probably the first time since the Nesser brothers back in the 20s, playing.
Darin, this feels
cool.
Darin, this feels grandiose now that what we're about to talk about, but you still had to talk more about the Steelers.
He could have been in Western Pennsylvania.
You had to talk more about the Steelers from the guy that never played in Pittsburgh. You know what I'm about to say here at number 1. So I'm just going to say it, I guess. Number 1, drafted in 2003, that's Big Ben. It's Ben Roethlisberger. He's my number 1. It's funny. If you would have taken a time machine and asked 2007, 8 Ed Cleese what I thought of Ben Roethlisberger, I would have told you I thought he was the most overrated quarterback in the NFL. I really argued that early in his career. I thought he was more of a game manager. I thought that he was just kind of taking advantage, like especially the 2005 champions. I thought he was just kind of there. And I was sort of –
But he had the bus behind him.
Exactly.
What do you really have to do as a rookie,
Yeah, so I was kind of like, this guy's all right. But then he really sold me through the middle and like later part of his career, where at some point you go like, okay, I guess I'm wrong. So he's 7th all time in yards. He's 9th all time in touchdowns. And one thing that stuck out, he's only 24th all time in interceptions. So we have like Favre, who's 1st all time in interceptions at the top of the list. At least during the regular season, Big Ben really wasn't a mistake-prone quarterback. And then I think he had one more interception in his career than Bradshaw did, and he threw the ball so many more times than Terry Bradshaw did.
I think he's one of the. If he's not the most, he's one of the most 500-yard games in a career.
Yes, just big time. And then what really stuck out to me, Darin, was in 2018 at age 36. He threw for 5,129 yards and 34 touchdowns. That's dumb. And then his career average was going 11-5. That was his like average season. So for essentially 20 years, he's putting up major numbers. He's going 11-5 every year or better. The Steelers are always in the playoffs. Earlier in his career, they win 2 Super Bowls. If you're going to poke any holes, he's 13-10 a career playoff record. His touchdown interception ratio in the playoffs was 36-28. 28 postseason interceptions. That's a lot. And in the last 3 times he made the playoffs, they were one and done each time. So like his playoff success kind of ended, earlier in his career. And then it kind of almost became the opposite, where they kind of had the reputation of making the playoffs but not advancing. And I don't really pin that on him so much, but it's there as part of his story. So for me, the reason I put him ahead of Watt was at some point the longevity does matter, and it's almost like he had double the career of J.J. Watt. So, yeah, I think J.J. Watt was probably a little bit of a better defensive end than Ben Roethlisberger was a quarterback. But Big Ben did it for so long and at such a high level that just puts him over the top for me. Roethlisberger isn't going to be in like top 5 quarterbacks of all time, but he's easily a Hall of Famer. Everybody would be thrilled to have him. And he is the best number 11 pick we've ever had since 1980, at least.
Well, I'm actually kind of surprised that you had him number 1. I'm happy that you did as a Steeler fan. But there's a couple things that I think people forget. Tommy Maddox was the starting quarterback when Roethlisberger was a rookie. Maddox gets hurt week 2, and Roethlisberger goes on a 15-1. Steelers had a 15-1 record that year. The only game they lost was the game that he entered into that Maddox was losing when he entered the game, and until they lost in the AFC Championship game. And the next year, he promised if Bettis would come back, he would take him to a Super Bowl, and he paid off on it. So when a guy says that in his second year and promises this old, grizzled veteran that's already on his way to Canton, hey, if you come back one more year, I'll take you to the Super Bowl, and he paid off for it. And the other thing is, I think the year, I think it was 2020 when he had the horrific elbow injury throwing that pass. It just sort of derailed his whole career. And that next year, the Steelers went 11-0 during the COVID season, but there was no passes thrown by him more than like 5 yards downfield. So finally, people started to catch on to that and disrupted that. But yeah, he's a polarizing figure his whole career. Had some legal trouble, had some scandals, had some motorcycle accidents, but won a couple Super Bowls and lost one. So I guess you can't complain about that for your franchise quarterback for almost 20 years.
Nope, you certainly cannot.
All right. Well, we talked about 4 Hall of Famers here in the era you're talking about from 1980. Well, we had a total of 8. So we had 4 before 1980, but one that was not in there. I told you we had another Heisman Trophy winner. John Cappelletti was drafted. He was by the Rams. He was a Heisman Trophy winner with the Penn State Nittany Lions. Of course, they had the movie Something for Joey was on. Probably you don't remember, but
I remember it. I remember seeing it.
Yeah, so his brother had some health issues, and John Cappelletti in his Heisman year sort of dedicated his season to it and had a lot of fame there. Paul Warfield was drafted by the Browns in 1964. Browns had some pretty good teams there. Pick up Warfield, and he had a great career both with them and I believe he went on with the Dolphins too. But this is kind of an amazing 4-year span. We had 3 Hall of Famers within 4 years drafted number 11. 1950, Leo Nomalini, San Francisco was drafted. Then 2 years later, Frank Gifford's drafted by the Giants. And the year after that, Doug Atkins, another Cleveland Brown, was drafted in 1953. So those early 50s really produced a lot of great players that have the busts in Canton.
And Gifford was a Monday Night Football legend too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but he was even probably a better player than he was an announcer. The draft stat of the day. I'm sorry, our most popular position. I almost forgot that, defensive end. So you talk about the J.J. Watts of the world and some others we talked about. Well, that's the most popular position with our 8 Hall of Famers, and our draft stat of the day takes us to kind of an interesting facet. We talked a few days ago about kind of a neat draft history. Well, how about this one? During a late round draft, the 17th round back in 1983, this was the Norm Van Brock. I'm sorry, can be 1983. Must be had to be 1973. 72. I'm sorry. Norm Van Brocklin, the Dutchman, was a coach for the Falcons. And he was kind of bored, and he decided to draft a guy by the name of Marion Morrison, who was 64 years old, who's better known as John Wayne. And he said his reasoning was, he told his people at the draft bag, he goes, "Don't you guys want to get the roughest, toughest SOB there is off the board?" So he drafts them. Of course, the commissioner would not disallowed this, and they ended up not taking the star of Fort Apache in 1948. Well, they end up taking the Falcons running back Bill Holland replaced the Duke on the Falcons that year. But so it was more of a joke type thing to leave the spirits up. But they went to the podium with John Wayne as their pick.
Those kooky Falcons.
Yeah. And they haven't been the same since. Maybe they should have took
right.
So, all right. Well, I think that wraps up our number 11 pick. We talked about a lot of great players here. A good portion of Canton was on this draft slot, and we have some more great things because tomorrow we enter into the top 10. And love to have you back again, Ed. We'll talk about the 10 spot.
See you tomorrow.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.